So I wanted to make this video to call out the universal baggage of immigrant children. My family moved here from South Korea when I was just a child, and as I got older and into my adulthood, I found myself wrestling with things like sacrifice, privilege, guilt, and burden. Despite how universal our experiences are, I feel like not a lot of us talk about it because even admitting to feeling them can trigger feelings of guilt, and I totally get that. Of course, I can only speak from my own experiences. I hope this normalizes the emotions that you yourself may be going through. Here we go. Parenting your parents. I think most of us expect to take care of our parents well after they retire. But I feel like for us immigrant kids, this taking care actually starts in childhood. For example, being the translator or the spokesperson of the family was almost like a rite of passage. And I remember very vividly at 12 years old, I made my first call to the IRS to set up a payment plan for my parents. You know, my parents were in their 30s when they immigrated here, couldn't speak English at all, and worked blue-collar jobs. And that's a lot, uprooting yourself from your native country to come here and assimilate into a predominantly white world where you feel like you are the underdog. And I think because of that, us immigrant children bear the weight of that responsibility. And this can manifest into small or big things, translating during doctor visits, PTA meetings, even to much larger things like sending back money home. And I think because of that, as I preparing to go to college and thinking about what do I want to do for myself, I instinctively kept my parents in mind. There's more of like a practicality to it that I unknowingly implemented. And you know that phrase, shoot for the moon, land on the stars? I feel like that was never super intuitive for me. Rather, it was more so like, how can I make sure I have enough fuel to even get anywhere? The primary emotion for immigrant kids, guilt. I feel like for a lot of us, the pervasive emotion is guilt, whether or not it's even logical. And growing into a young adult, I found that this guilt pops up in small and big ways. For example, a small one is once I started making money with my first job, I could finally afford to kind of go on a nice-ish trip for myself. Like we never took big vacations growing up. And I remember feeling guilty, like, oh, I'm going on this nice trip, like my parents never got to ever growing up. This guilt can also affect much bigger things in our lives, like our career. That joke about parents wanting their kids to be doctors, that's fucking true. Also, if you think about it, put yourself in their shoes. You're coming into a new country as an underdog in this white man's world where you don't even know the language. So of course you prioritize financial stability. Of course you want respect. And I think that is what forms that narrow definition of success. And our parents impart that onto us. And I feel like my parents were a bit atypical. They were very not much of the tiger mom profile. They kind of just like trusted me to do my own thing. But even with that, I graduated with a pre-med degree at UCLA. And after obtaining that degree, I quickly realized medicine wasn't the route for me, even though I did find science really interesting. And I'm now in a field that is totally irrelevant. I'm sure that those expectations of financial stability, of respect, affected my decision making, with or without my awareness. And I think on the flip side, this guilt also drove me to have this hyper awareness of the privilege that I have, the ability to dream, the ability to take advantage of these opportunities. This privilege of optionality is something that my parents never had. It made me feel a sense of like, oh my gosh, I can't fuck this up. You almost put more pressure onto yourself to do well, however you define doing well. And now that I look back from my late 20s, I'm now able to replace some of that guilt with a sense of gratitude. Now I better understand, like, where is that guilt coming from? I think a part of that is entirely self-induced. And that is when it becomes kind of misplaced, right? It's more of like a habit than anything. But other times, I do think it is unintentionally or intentionally induced by our parents. So I do want to recognize that sometimes that guilt is placed onto you. But for me, even being able to reroute the self-induced guilt that is misplaced and channel that towards a healthy sense of gratitude has been super helpful. I always asked myself this question: how can I show up for my parents without losing myself in the process? As an adult, I've always felt the tension of prioritizing myself versus like my family. And I think this just comes from cultural differences. The collectivism of Eastern culture versus the individualism in American culture. I think a lot of the times for me, showing up in the way that I wanted to show up actually burned me out in terms of energy, resources, money. And I feel like that is something that we all have to figure out. What is that balance for us? I've also come to realize that sometimes setting boundaries is a privilege. In other words, it's one thing to say no with having the privilege to even do that. So for example, a lot of the times in Asian culture, it is expected that you help your parents out with their retirement, and or maybe you are their retirement plan. But that's a lot, right? That's a lot of pressure. That made me wrestle with, okay, what's that balance of like being a good daughter and providing for my parents sustainably with also going after my dreams that may require more risk. And we're all gonna deal with this in our different ways, but I feel like getting to a place of setting healthy boundaries while also realizing like sometimes boundaries are a privilege. How do I more sustainably show up for my parents without losing myself is taking care of me. So my therapist calls this parenting yourself. And she was like, all adults should do this. And when you're an adult, there is that inner child within you that needs care, that needs parenting. And a lot of the times you can only take care of yourself in the way that only you can. In other words, like how I parent myself is really getting to a place of awareness of what are my unmet needs. What am I feeling? Why am I feeling that? Like what need is lacking for me to feel that? And what can I do or who can I ask for help to fulfill that need? Another thing that's been helpful for me is really understanding what are my limits, right? When is it the point that I just need to tap out? For me, when I communicated that more openly, it worked really well. And my parents were, disappointed, but like also understanding because we're all adults here now. And I think the last thing that I'll mention in terms of how to parent yourself, taking care of myself, is making sure I'm accounted for in advance. And you know that whole saying, like when you're on an airplane, make sure you put on your oxygen mask before you help others. I take that very seriously. And I think because I've been in circumstances where I've given too much, I've now been able to strike this balance of like, okay, Jenny, you need to make sure you're good. That is your responsibility because no one knows your need better than you. And I think one mindset shift that really impacted me was realizing it doesn't always have to be like a binary zero-sum game, right? Just because I give X doesn't mean it translates into Y deficit. And I think I only felt like that because I didn't account for myself. Okay, I know I just spent the last 10 minutes talking about our universal baggage, but you know how people typically say immigrant kids have a lot of resilience? That we fucking do. And I'm really proud of that, and you should be too. I feel like these experiences have given me personally a treasure trove of opportunities to exercise resilience, exercise grit that makes me feel like really grown. Why are you doing the things that you do? Where does it stem from? And being able to dissect once you know that, is that still something you want to be engaging in? Or is it more of a learned behavior that you want to start unlearning for yourself? So thanks so much for watching. If you have anything to add, like please comment and hope you enjoyed. Thanks. Bye.